Good morning on this Sunday, January 7th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Happy New Year. Atlanta city leaders have good news to ring in the new year. Violent crime is down all over the city. Also, candidates are deciding if they'll run or which district they'll run in after a federal judge accepts Georgia's new legislative and congressional maps. And after an AJC investigation into Georgia's Department of Corrections, critics are calling for major reforms. Kathy, Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Violent crime is down across the city of Atlanta. That was the good news delivered by Mayor Andre Dickens and the police chief. They say excellent police work and community engagement are making all the difference.
We ended this year with citywide major crimes against people down more than 15%, and that includes homicides being down more than 20%.
APD's police chief thanked officers for working more 12-hour shifts and the mayor and council for dishing out raises and new police cars.
Shooting incidents are down 18%, and the number of people that were shot down 23%. By making sure that we're removing guns from our streets, going after the gangs members and the drug dealers that are pulling the triggers on those guns. Those reductions were seen in the area of robbery, in burglary, and in car break-ins.
The mayor and chief called the gains a group effort and said it would not have been done without invaluable community partners who changed lives by changing directions.
We put in place, a safe space for a young man to get life skills, social skills, conflict resolution, anger management, job readiness.
Using the Cure Violence model, we're actively reducing shootings and interpersonal conflicts through our violence interrupters, while addressing disparities through our outreach workers that often leaves folks vulnerable to being a victim of violence, a driver of violence, or both.
The numbers of car break-ins are also on the decline. Car thefts, though, are the one category on the increase. Kathy, this is some really good news to start off the new year, and it's nice to see some of these nonprofits working with the police department and getting out in the communities.
Well, yeah, you know, we always talk about community-oriented policing, and it's what works when everybody's kind of partnering together to make sure we understand where the problem areas are and who needs a little support. And I think the police chief has really had a steady hand in Atlanta, and it's starting to pay off. So congratulations to the mayor and to the police chief.
Phil, you know, you were I won't say skeptical, but maybe waiting to see, you know, how this was all going to shake out. You weren't going to give Mayor Andre Dickens a grade because you wanted to see what he would do with crime. What do you think about this turnaround in the numbers?
Well, you are correct, and it is good news to start the new year. Now, yes, these are self-reported numbers by the police department, but when you think about 171 homicides the year before and then down to 135, that is good news. I am disturbed by the shoplifting is up. I think we really need to crack down on that. And of course, the motor vehicle theft was up, which is concerning of a lot of people. But we're on the best road. We're going away from the disastrous years of former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. And now if we can just get more police officers recruiting, and they're working on that. And I'm glad to see finally that Chief Darren Gierbaum is saying we're tackling the gangs. That's not something we heard 4 or 5 years ago.
You know, when you hear more about the gangs, you know, the gang members going to trial, they're in the news, you feel like almost like we can breathe a sigh of relief.
We're making a dent.
We're making progress. Theron, one thing we don't hear much about with these kinds of numbers is Buckhead City anymore.
No, you don't. And, you know, you got to give a lot of credit to this mayor. I mean, Buckhead was front and center in the mayor's race. Public safety was the preeminent issue that all the mayoral candidates talked about. But you got to compliment Mayor Dickens because while he did focus on Buckhead, he focused on the city in its entirety. But the one stat that really stood out to me, Lori, and the mayor talked about this, and he said, look, one homicide is too much. You know, he made it very clear that there are a lot of families who lost loved ones throughout the years. But when he talked about how his youth homicides are down 46%, and we know that there's been a lot of crime amongst youth. We know that guns is the #1 reason why we're seeing our young people die in America. And in a lot of these sort of incidents that we saw, they were acquaintances. There were disputes that usually ends in a fight or a shoving match or maybe a stabbing. But now it's people shooting each other and stabbing to kill. And so you definitely got to give a lot of credit to Mayor Dickens and to Chief Gierbaum, but more importantly to the women and men of the Atlanta Police Department. I think the training, the community policing, as Kathy talked about, definitely is kicking in. And the mayor is partnering with other organizations because we all know in the city of Atlanta, no matter if you're in Buckhead or you're in the SWATs or you're in East Atlanta or over in Howell Mill, you want crime to be at an all-time low as possible because it definitely helps everybody have a better way of life.
Well, there's also been an emphasis on mental health, not only in the city of Atlanta, but with the police department, but also in the exurbs where I live. But what I think is important is while Theron's numbers are correct as far as these kind of skirmishes, the biggest reason that young people die is suicide, okay? And so by getting those suicide numbers down too, which aren't going to reflect in these numbers that the mayor's talking about, but by adding the mental health factor to it, there's some improvement all the way around. And if you can deal with some of these mental health issues, you're going to see all of these numbers get better. So I think there's some progress there too.
And those community partners are also talking about, conflict resolution and teaching kids like this is how you fight, right?
And one of the problems, too, to touch on Martha's point, is I saw where homelessness was up 30% from a year ago. That's going to be a big problem because it ties into the mental illness issue.
Correct.
But real quick, the use of technology. This chief, Sherbon, before he became chief, was really big on technology, using cameras, making sure that the cameras are working, partnering with Georgia Power to make sure that the lights are on, so when you do have the camera going in the parking lot, you can actually see the crimes happening. So the use of technology, partnering with those folks, have been, I think, a huge part of this as well.
Good points. Well, Theron, Mayor Dickens is still the target, though, of criticism because of his stance on the new Atlanta Police and Training Fire facility. Before a speech to young Democrats at Manuel's Tavern, the popular political hangout was targeted by vandals. This was really sad to see.
Martha and I actually was at Manuel's Tavern last year. We spoke to the Leadership Gwinnett crowd, and shout out to that great organization who brings us back every year. And Martha always puts it on me in a sort of political way. Always leave the crowd, sort of guessing what I'm saying. But, Manuel's Tavern, let's just start there. It's a staple in this community. It is the first place that I went as a young Democrat. We would go there, eat the wings, drink the beers, very affordable. And to have this, this place attack any business, but particularly this business, is very unfortunate. But I want to praise the owner of Manuel's Tavern to making sure, Mr. Maloof and the mayor, for basically seeing it through. The event still happened. The mayor still made the speech. This is a group that definitely wanted him to come and talk about it. And so it's very concerning that there's still vandalism going on around this issue.
Well, and that's what he should do. He should come out and speak to people that he knew probably weren't going to be 100% with him on that. But the mayor's doing what's right in this situation. He is doing what most of the people want. There are still these factions that want to be heard, but I'm frustrated on a lot of levels, and we'll get to them later, of where people who don't agree with you are going after you in ways that are inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if they think that the people who did this think that they had some kind of strategy that would convince people to join their cause, they didn't.
No.
They just picked on a small business owner who makes everyone welcome at their bar, no matter what their political affiliation. Even though it's a Democratic stronghold, you see police officers, firefighters, we'll let Martha in, it's like,
I've been going there for years.
Darn, anybody can come. But yet they chose to really create havoc for a business owner who's been a contributing person for our community, and I really hate it. I think it's awful.
But just one footnote to that, there is a strategy to it. These are far leftists. They don't like the police facility. They spray painted the name of the mayor on one of the sections of the building. But the strategy is chaos and to sow division and with people. That's the strategy of the far left.
Well, it's not working. So
it's not working.
It's not. Some Republican state lawmakers will continue to focus on crime as they head back to the state capitol this week. Phil, they're looking at more mandatory minimums for gang-related crimes. They're also looking to require cash bail for some crimes like trespassing and forgery.
Well, yes, and this is the right thing to do. I think there'll be some bipartisan support here because we see just in Atlanta, if you want to compare Atlanta to, say, Sandy Springs, where I live, and you're a new resident there, you're out the next day when you do some of these crimes. You don't have to put up anything. And so in Sandy Springs, if it's a felony, our magistrates will give them 6 months, and that's a deterrent. And so I'm glad to see this. We talked about gangs just a few minutes ago. The estimate is some 70,000 heavily armed, often gang members. So, and Theron, to your point, we are getting more jurisdictional cooperation to try to go after. This is not talking redistricting here. We're talking crime. But I think that's good that we're seeing that.
Theron, former Governor Nathan Deal got so much credit for his criminal justice reform. Are we moving the opposite way now?
Well, if you really look at some of the comments by some of the Republicans, go to what Martha is saying. I mean, look, to me, the issue around public safety shouldn't just be that Republicans are being tough and Democrats are, being tough, but we do have to, admit the fact that the Republicans control the state legislature, and so there are Democrats that will probably agree with some of the things. But when you get into this issue around cash bonds, whether or not you're criminalizing poverty and different things like that, I think that's where the argument goes. But look, Governor Deal deserves a lot of credit for really stepping up at a time where, look, criminal justice reform was not something that was in a Republican platform or talking points, but he was being governor. So I do think that this governor and this legislature are not going away totally for what Governor Deal has put in place, but you do see some things that they're sort of pushing that maybe Governor Deal would have not been as far right on that they are now right now.
Kathy?
Well, I have a lot of concerns about mandatory minimum sentencing. I think, not giving judges the discretion to make decisions about who should go to jail and for how long is really problematic, and we've seen it before. You have 16, 17-year-olds who make a bad decision, sometimes even tragic decisions, but, maybe they straighten their lives out, they go to college while they're in jail, and then, are eligible to come out and, rejoin society, and I think we should encourage that. And as we talk about our Department of Corrections, we'll see there's some of the biggest gangs in Georgia are operating out of our jail. So sending a gang member, for 20 years to learn under the best and the brightest is perhaps not a good strategy.
We'll be talking about that. Yeah. Up next, candidates are deciding their future plans now that a federal judge has ruled in Georgia's new congressional and legislative maps.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Congresswoman Lucy McBath will now run in Georgia's new 6th congressional district, Congressman Rich McCormick in the 7th. This after federal judge Steve Jones accepted the new congressional and legislative maps passed by state lawmakers in a special session. Kathy, let's talk about the maps first, because some Democrats say even though approved by Judge Jones, they believe the maps still violate the Voting Rights Act.
Well, I'm just relieved that we've got him out in time for election officials to be able to get ready for elections coming up. At a certain point, you've got to stop and go. I don't like the maps. I don't like the way we do redistricting. I think that, we're not adequately representing the population in the state of Georgia, but that's been going on for a long time. Maybe we'll hash that out in the courts. But really, what's most important is to let election officials have the time to run a good election.
Well, I think Judge Jones did a beautiful job of weighing the constitutional side, which acknowledges that redistricting is a political process, and the side of the Voting Rights Act and what the role of race is in there. And I think he gave a blueprint, which was a very long blueprint from the first decision that he made. He gave a blueprint, it was followed, and he believes it passed muster. And I think he did a good job. I didn't criticize him on the first decision, even though I didn't like the way it went personally, but I did. I think that he followed suit in his thought process, and he did the right thing.
Theron, some of the fallout is that you've got some longtime Democrats in the state capitol who announced that they're no longer running.
Yeah, State Representative Doug Stoner and State Representative Greg Kennard up in Gwinnett County. Doug Stoner being in Cobb came out this week and said, look, we're not going to run for office. Doug Stoner was sort of drawn into a district with Terry Nolovich, and Greg Kennard was drawn into a district with Sam Park. But we do have Becky Evans and you have Sarah Draper who are going to run against each other. And so these were very honorable men who stepped up and said, look, we're going to step aside, not run again. That doesn't mean that they're not going to go to the Capitol and still serve their constituents. But it did put some Democrats in a very, very tough situation. But while I'm disappointed with the outcome, I think that Democrats had a strategy in place that this could have been the outcome, meaning that he could have ruled in favor. And so now you just got to make sure that we got some good candidates that can run, and we will pick up a few seats, hopefully, in maybe below the metro area where we got some really good candidates running for office.
Phil?
Well, this was a total vindication of what the Republicans did when they were drawing the congressional maps and the state legislative maps. Judge Steve Jones, incidentally an Obama appointee, said the Republicans were right. They were in, quote, full compliance, unquote, of the judge's instructions. And actually, the judge, interestingly, got irritated with some of these Democrat activists who were talking about, wait a minute, you're ignoring, under the Voting Rights Act, these so-called coalition districts. The judge rightly said there's no such thing as this. It's a very narrowly tailored Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so congratulations to Steve Jones. And yes, now we can go ahead with the elections.
And I know we get involved in personalities because we like these people and we know these people, but the thing we always have to keep at the forefront forefront is that this is not an individual person's seat, whether it's a legislator or whether it's under the Gold Dome or it's a congressional seat. They belong to the people, and they don't belong to whoever holds the seat at that particular time. And we forget that, and that's hard because we like these folks and we know these folks. But if you keep that as your perspective, it's a lot easier to deal with.
A good reminder. Well, another ruling by U.S. District Court Judge Jones on Tuesday, he ruled a conservative group did not violate the Voting Rights Act when it announced it was challenging the eligibility of more than 360,000 Georgia voters just before a 2021 runoff election for two pivotal U.S. Senate seats. Kathy, were you surprised at this ruling?
Well, I think it's important to look at, there's sort of two aspects of the ruling. One was that the plaintiff failed to demonstrate that anybody was actually intimidated, and that's the basis for his decision on this. But what he did say was that the list that True the Vote was using to challenge eligibility was overly broad. They were taken from post office change of address forms and caught up a lot of people in that. And as one that was chair of the Fulton County Board of Elections when these challenges started, it's really not the way to clean up lists. To have people come down with lists of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people for us to have to go through and search and validate, versus letting the Secretary of State clean those lists and work at it at a more systematic kind of way. But because of the challenges, we didn't have time to do that. We had to respond to the immediacy of the really bad legislation, in my opinion.
Phil?
Well, let's tell the viewers who was actually going after True the Vote, who were trying to just clean up the voter rolls, which I would hope you're in favor of, Kathy, but and I think you are. But this was Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight group. It was actually the Biden Justice Department that was doing all of this. But the judge, again, Steve Jones, Federal Judge Jones, ruled that no, True the Vote was correct, even though it was overly broad in terms of some of the voter challenges. The point of this victory for the conservatives is you have every right, anyone has a right to challenge votes, and then let the investigations begin.
Well, let me just say something. You have a right to challenge somebody who you truly believe voted illegally, but not to cast doubt on thousands of voters, tens of thousands of voters statewide, just because you saw their name on a change of address form or something like that. You still have the right to ask, are these, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but these aren't election deniers that the left-wingers is already talking about. They're just asking questions. Well, I wouldn't know that I would characterize it that way. They may well be election deniers, but I mean, I really think that some changes need to happen to that because it's overly burdening election officials with trying to sort of prioritize, my feelings about who the list is versus their professional opinion about how to keep the list clean.
Martha?
I loved what you said about it shouldn't be done on this county level, but they should use the process like the Secretary of State's office uses, because some of these same folks on the other side, every time the Secretary of State goes through their 7-year process before they remove somebody from a voter roll in saying that somehow they were wrongly removed. I do think also that the Secretary of State's process is very thorough, but a lot of folks on your side criticize when that happens too.
Well, I think that more transparency is needed about that schedule and how that goes, because one of the things that I noticed when I was on the board was we never knew when they were going to do the change of address and when they were going to make particular changes. They just kind of came, and then we'd sort of get dumped with the changes, on a schedule. So I think there can be improvements on both sides on this in terms of that. I'd like to see the voter rolls cleaned up because it saves everybody money and saves everybody process. But you do have to be careful with people's right to vote and be as accurate as you can.
No one was intimidated. That's the bottom line.
That doesn't mean nobody was intimidated. We certainly saw people. We certainly saw people come. We certainly saw people come down. We had a woman who came down, just for example, who had been in an abusive relationship and had used a post office box. Perhaps she shouldn't have done so, but it was for her own safety. She was highly inconvenienced by that process, and she was surely mad. We saw Republican voters who came down and the same sort of thing happened.
That wasn't a part
That's
of this
really
case.
good insight. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Up next, as criticism mounts, there are calls for massive reform at Georgia's Department of Corrections. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Critics of Georgia's Department of Corrections are calling for a massive reform after an AJC investigation uncovered a system in crisis. Theron, some of the more disturbing allegations surround the lack of transparency on things like prisoner deaths and prisoner escapes, and there's just a mounting criticism from the AJC if you read any of that investigation. It's really well done.
I did, and I wrote about this in Georgia Trend in my column last month in December. And so the first step, Lori, is that whenever you know that there's a crisis, you have to admit that we have one. And AJC, even before this article came out, I mean, a lot of people, including myself, have been saying that there's a crisis in this jail. And we got to talk about what type of crisis it is. It's a human rights crisis. If you look at just the conditions and how this is supposed to be a place where people go to serve time, they've definitely committed a crime, but it's supposed to be rehabilitation going on. I personalized my story about having an uncle who went to jail for almost 40 years. And to this day, he's out. He's a productive citizen. But I don't really think that he had the rehabilitation that he needed. He actually had massive strokes and had health conditions. But when I see the stat that 30% of the jobs that need to be filled in the prison system are vacant, these corrections officers, these women and men are in these jobs not being paid what they should be doing, and they're here to manage. And as Kathy pointed out, we have a huge crisis with gangs and criminal activity that's being organized in the jail. And so this is something that I think bipartisan support needs to be around, and I think that the AJC has pointed out a lot of things that a lot of us already knew was going on.
Phil?
Well, good point. The commissioner of the Department of Corrections has only been on the job about a little over a year. However, you're right. He needs to be down to the legislature, I think, knocking on doors of both parties and saying, we need more money for our corrections officers. They're understaffed, they're underpaid, as we know. That's one of the problems. The second problem, you alluded to this earlier in the broadcast, this is the biggest recruitment center of gangs in the state, is the state, sadly, the state prison system. I've been talking and writing about this for 15 years. This is not something that just happened. And so what we have to do, you've got, like in Smith State Prison, you had the warden convicted of working with prisoners on a contraband scheme. So there's got to be massive reform. There may be a plan pivoting to turn this around by the commissioner. I haven't seen it, but I want to see a plan for reform. Maybe our colleague Janelle King can talk about that a little bit.
Well,
in the
part of
future.
that plan should be transparency. And if you start not reporting, I won't say covering up, but if you start not reporting things like prisoner escapes and prisoner health conditions
or deaths, you need to know.
Then how's anybody going to know about the problems to fix them?
That's a good point.
Well, I think the General Assembly needs to get their own house in order and quit looking over the fence at Atlanta and Fulton County's jail and really tackle this, right? You know, they're looking at all these other things that they want to get after, but this is such a massive problem. It's so dangerous for everybody involved, including the communities around these prisons, that you know, that should be the primary focus this year.
Martha.
Look, my husband is the doctor at the Hall County Detention Center, and that's a little different than what we're talking about here. But the mental health side of it, I know it's like a broken record on this. The mental health side of it, the recruitment side that you're talking about, these are all important issues. And you're right, Phil, they haven't been, this isn't new. I think it's just people want to push it under the rug because they're hard to deal with. They're hard to deal with, it's difficult to deal with. But I think now you're right, it should be bipartisan. This should not be Democrat or Republican. Every person that has a jail or someone that might have to deal with the jail should care about this.
And on the recruitment side, you've got to pay these people more. I mean, if they can go to maybe a job that's not as dangerous, right? If they could go to a fast food restaurant or they could go to a grocery store and work for the same amount of money, why put yourself in harm's way to work in these prisons?
You're making a good point. There's a footnote here, too, that should be frustrating to everybody. In the federal prison system, cell phones are banned and you can block them. For some crazy reason, we can't get this through. In the state prison system, we cannot ban the cell phones, and that's how the gangs really operate.
Good points, everybody. All right, stay tuned for winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, my winner is going to be, as I indicated earlier in the show, Steve Jones, the Obama appointee. I don't think I've ever made a federal judge as an Obama appointee winner, but I do like those two decisions with the maps and with the true the vote thing. And then my loser, and this is something, again, that should be bipartisan problem solving here, the massive influx of millions just this past year on the border. I don't see my losers are Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff. They're sitting on their hands. Some Democrat senators, to their credit, are working with Republicans to try to get the return to Mexico policy for the illegal immigrants and just enforce current laws. I don't see Ossoff and Warnock doing anything.
Kathy.
Okay, I'm going to focus on some winners here. First, Matt Mashburn is the acting chair of the state election board. He's under fire because he didn't vote to investigate Raffensperger, who's already been investigated. I just want to call out that he is a great example of a public servant. I don't know if they get paid for anything, but I got to know him at Fulton County when he was investigating us. He was fair, he was knowledgeable, he worked really hard, and I hope he doesn't get removed because we need those kinds of public servants adjudicating our elections.
Theron.
You know, tomorrow everybody goes back to the Capitol to start the legislative session. We talked a lot about the legislators, but definitely the PAGE program, the staffers, everybody who runs the place, definitely looking forward to them. And then on a sadder note, I want to give my condolences to the Turpo family. We lost Marty Turpo last week. Great Atlantan, did a lot for this city and this county. Aaron Turpo, his father, was a great political mind, still out here doing stuff. So definitely want to offer my condolences to him. He will be missed. He did a lot of great work with the Development Authority of Fulton County.
And also condolences. All of us remember I got mine at Boomershine, the Boomershine car dealerships that were all over Atlanta.
Yes.
Walt Boomershine, 94 years old, passed away this week. He was preceded in death by his daughter and his wife, so he is a very happy man now in heaven. But he was a great guy, and he always gave me reading assignments. We'd get together for coffee, and he'd give me books to read. So, Walt, you were a great guy. Condolences.
Make it a great week, everybody. See you next time.